Welcome back to the first week of EDUC 815. This is the second part of a podcast, and where we left off at was, yes, talking about Web 3.0 technologies, especially how we've seen them happen during this Black Friday this year. But we're moving on now to this YouTube video from someone named Dan Brown. So in your PowerPoint, you're going to have to click on his picture to get to his open letter to educators, and I'm going to leave this as an option whether or not you want to listen. I just listened. You might find it to be a little bit negative. You might disagree with him, but what he's talking about is the devaluing of information, rather. Since there's so much available online for free, the need to simply memorize information has a less value than what it had before. And so Dan Brown is calling for the educators of the world to consider the ways in which the world has changed and to maybe consider how we're educating students. And part of that is because of this reality. Learning needs to be placed in the context of the student's world driven by technology. When we think about those who are baby boomers, the 76 million people born between 1945 and 1964, at the time, half their job knowledge would become obsolete in 12 to 15 years. So there is some need for continuing education and retraining, but it's nowhere near what it is today. When we look at the busters, the 65 million people born between 65 and 84, half their job knowledge has become obsolete in 30 to 36 months. And so there's this need for just ongoing continuing education at all times. And that's why we need more than anything as educators, I think, is to teach students how to learn. It's also true that a minimum of 4 career changes and 9 different jobs is going to be a reality for today's kindergartners. And of course, some of those jobs haven't even been conceived of yet. In fact, 65% is the estimate. So again, teaching students how to problem solve, how to learn are some of the biggest skills that we can teach them, more than the ability to memorize information. Futurist Jana Anderson says this: but the traditional idea of the teacher may be much less valuable to the future, just like the traditional library will have much less value. We need to remove the old books that no one has opened in 20 years and put them in nearby storage. What we do need are places where people can gather, places that foster an atmosphere of intellectual expansion. Speaking as a school library media specialist, I can tell you that libraries are moving towards something called a learning commons, where we have more open spaces in the school library media center for knowledge to be created. And weeding is what we call it in the field if we are going to remove some of those books. And it's not because we don't value information, but at some point, dated information becomes a stumbling block to get at what we really need to get at on the shelf. And I think the same is true with technology and with learning. There might be some things that need to move aside so that we can really get at what we need to get at so we can serve our students and our teachers well. And I definitely think having those learning common spaces can support it. I know part of the screen is cut off, but the library that's featured down here below actually doesn't have any books. It's just electronic, and there's learning spaces. I am very biased. I think long live paper, and I love books, but I definitely think we need to make sure we're giving students access to the resources they need. There's also this phenomenon going on in the world of doubling rates. So we're in a culture and a time where information is just doubling all the time, and there's always more information to know than what one person can possibly know. But the way the math works is this: if you pick a number, let's say I pick 8, and then I sum the numbers to the left, 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 4 is 7, I'll always get 1 less than the number I picked. And I think we have all felt that, that we just can never quite keep up with technology. One person described it as trying to build an airplane while you're in the air. There's just always more going on than we can ever possibly learn. Jim Carroll, futurist, said this: by 2020 or sooner, it'll all be about just-in-time knowledge. In a world of fast knowledge development, none of us will have the capacity to know much of anything at all. The most important skill we have is the ability to get out, to go ability to go out to get the right knowledge for the right purpose at the right time. I think information literacy is so key that we're teaching students how to find, access, and evaluate good information and create it if needed, and to collaborate as necessary to find it, but that knowledge that is just in time for us. This argument, I think, has gone on for a long time. We've seen it in the math classroom. A lot of people have asked about, do we use calculators or no calculators, and should students have to learn it on their own? And I think we need to evolve with the time. You can see here on the right is an app from Texas Instruments. Many of you probably had their fancy TI-84 graphing calculator when you're in high school, but now, of course, it's an app. I think a better question besides calculators or no calculators is which one fits the digital brain and helps students to access the information that they need. The other thing is to consider how students are accessing information, and I'd even say Facebook might be a little bit too old for our students as well. It says here, and this is over a decade ago, 70% of students under age 17 prefer to get their information from blogs or podcasts. I'd be curious to know now what the rate would be for texting. Facebook might be a way to disseminate information, but I've seen a lot of inroads with Seesaw in the elementary grades and with Schoology and Google Classroom. Again, we're trying to push the information out to students to their mobile devices and places where they're going to access it. Blog, speaking of the fact that says students like to get information from their blog, was Merriam-Webster's Word of the Year in 2004, and it's a website that contains online personal information with reflections, comments, and hyperlinks provided by the writer. We already talked about at the beginning of this lecture that you don't have a textbook for this course because we're pulling information from the internet, and I often think that that's where you can find some of the best information about technology. I certainly ran into that dynamic as I was writing my dissertation for this program. Found great information from George Kurios, for example, on his blog. Here's another example of an educator who has a blog with good information if you'd like to take a peek at it. It's from Dr. Scott McLeod. Another way in which we can find information is from EPUBs, and you remember the quote from Steve Jobs talking about wanting to give free textbooks through the iPad. But EPUB stands for electronic publishing, and it's a way for you to publish your books in electronic format to be viewed on devices such as a smartphone or an iPad. There is an assignment in this course where you can either create a blog or an EPUB. I give you some choices, but that might be something that you want to explore and pass on to your teachers. A few more words for us that are fun in the technological world: brainstorming, sitting around a group discussing why a deadline was missed or a project failed and who was responsible. Hopefully we won't have any of that in this course. I think with technology such as Google Docs, etc., we're able to get and make deadlines clearly. Next, we have percussive maintenance, the fine art of whacking a technology device to get it to work again. Only works on devices with moving parts. I don't know if we see this so much anymore, but sometimes you can tap an iPad to get the screen to come into focus, etc. And then the oh no second, this is probably the funnest one, that minuscule fraction of time in which you realize that you've just made a big technology mistake, like after hitting send on unfinished mail. And let's all have grace for each other in this course if that happens to any of us, and just realize that it was an oh no second. So wrapping it up here, why focus on technology and education? Well, lifelong learning will be necessary for today's students, and technology will be their teacher when they leave the formal K-12 education system. I think we've touched on how important it is for students not so much to memorize rote information, but to know how to find and evaluate good information, and to be preparing them for institutions of higher learning, where of course you're going to need to be able to access information using technology like we are in this course. Technology must become the core content for students, and I think we're seeing that as the different subject areas come up for review on the curriculum cycle, that technology is being embedded into those standards. And then finally, the low-hanging fruit has already been picked. We will not be able to accomplish what we've been asked to do without technology. The things that can be done in many ways have already been done, and now we need to look for innovative ways to move forward. We could sum it up in this way: 21st century education. Our biggest challenge is the time zone difference. In Singapore, which is one of the leading countries in technology, it's 2:45, but in our district it's 1974. I think we need to take an honest look at where we're at using technology and how we can best serve our students so that they're ready and equipped to be global citizens. And so finally, I want to just talk briefly about your first assignment in this first module, this first week. There are more details uploaded to the Moodle site, so please take a look at that. But your first assignment, and I think this is the most utilitarian that I've come across as a practitioner, are surveys, gathering information that's needed to move school systems forward. I think it's really important to ask your staff where they're at in technology in terms of how they're using it or how they'd like assistance or things that need to be purchased or how they'd like to move forward. In the past, we've used paper and pencil or had scanned forms, but then you have to sit there and tally. But now we have great electronic bases. Boy, 15 years ago, SurveyMonkey was the coolest thing, and it's still out there and still useful. You can do about 10 questions for free, but now Google Forms are also free as long as you have a Google account, and you can have unlimited questions connected to a Google Sheet, and you can quickly get some simple statistics on what's going on and how your staff are responding. I like to send out surveys just to find out what tech integration needs exist in the building. I find that it's an efficient way to gather that information, and I'm sure you're going to find as an administrator it's efficient as well. And then the final tool you can use is Qualtrics. Qualtrics is something that you have access to as a Bethel student. A lot of you may be using Qualtrics to do some survey work for your dissertation, perhaps. I like Qualtrics a lot. The challenge is that your actual K-12 school district may not have access to it. So definitely utilize it now while you're a student, but know that SurveyMonkey or Google Forms might be what you will be using in the future. So go ahead and take a look at the details of the assignment on the Moodle page, and if you have questions, please call me or email me. I'm happy to answer your questions. I hope your first week is off to a great start, and I look forward to 8 wonderful weeks in EDUC 815.